Morning, everyone. This is Andy Jarvis. Through the miracles of technology, I'm based here. I'll be here snoring, actually, right as you listen to this in Colombia. But sending you this presentation on the kind of background on agriculture and agricultural development here in Colombia. I'll probably be awake a little bit later on, and I'll be attending the Q&A for any questions that come up. So here we go. Let's go. Let's get going on this. So next slide. So, first of all, just to give you a little bit of background of why I'm talking to you. CIAT's involved with this Prosperity Fund here in Colombia. We've been very closely engaged with the embassy over the years. And so we're kind of playing a role here as creating a bit of a bridge between the UK and Colombia and helping support on the ground some of the activities here in Colombia. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the CGIAR, CIAT is the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. We're one of 15 centers of the CGIAR across the world. There you can see them nicely on a map where they all exist. The little logo there is for CIAT. We're based in Cali in Colombia, where I can tell you it's much better weather than it is in the UK right now. So get yourselves applying for this to come and get some nice weather. But so CIAT's one of these centers. Now, our mission is to reduce hunger and poverty, improve human nutrition in the tropics through research aimed at increasing the eco-efficiency of agriculture. We're a kind of research for development organization with doing kind of science, but very much applied, looking at both agricultural development, but also issues related to human health and also to environment. We kind of have this dual role of Colombian and Spanish. So everything we have our name is CIAT is an acronym in Spanish, but we work in English. These are some of the areas that we work on. So we have areas kind of core work over the many years has been on commodities, on breeding programs in beans, on cassava, in rice. And forage crops. We have a gene bank, an international gene bank, which stores the kind of global collections for these crops. But then we have other elements in our portfolio of work. So looking at things like soil health, the environmental side of things, on land restoration, ecosystem services, climate change on the environment side, looking at things like new technologies and big data. So we've got a big program on big data in agriculture. And then more into kind of social dimensions of agricultural development, looking at issues of gender, impact assessment, and sustainable food systems. So we've got a pretty broad mandate. Next slide. I think I've forgotten to tell you the next slide. We're now on CIAT strategic objectives. And so there really we've got these three high-level objectives, looking at making affordable, high-quality food readily available to the rural and urban poor by boosting agricultural productivity. So this is kind of the issue of there's a big piece there on the breeding and improving nutritional quality also on staple crops. Promoting rural income growth, and so this is looking at the kind of market orientation and sustainable food systems, having food systems that work for the rural poor, but also in the urban poor more and more. And so looking at agricultural value chains. And then the third is the means to make a more intensive and competitive agriculture kind of more environmentally sustainable and climate smart. So a big piece on climate smart agriculture and climate change issues, but also on environmental sustainability of production systems and the link to natural ecosystems. Next slide. So we're a global institution. You can see there all of our different offices, but really the rest of this talk is going to be focused on Colombia. That's where we have our headquarters. We've got a beautiful campus, about 600 people here on the campus, based in Cali, Colombia. And we've got a very rich history of 50 years now here, based here, with very close linkages working with Colombian institutions. So I'll move on to now the beautiful Colombia. So the bottom line, if Colombia, if you kind of capture it in one word, it's diversity. It's beautiful. It's incredibly diverse. There you can see a map of the different kind of major ecosystems, and it's got a bit of everything. You can find Down in the Amazon, you've got Amazon rainforest in the Orinoquia. You have savannas in the Andes. You've got cloud forests and interandean valleys and snow-capped volcanoes. You can see there some Paramo, a photo of Paramo, which is kind of highland, high peatlands, basically. You have the Pacifico, which is down on the Pacific coast, which is again pretty dense tropical forest. And then you have the Caribbean coast, which is a fairly kind of flat, drier ecosystem. And so really you have everything in Colombia. It's a beautiful country to work in, incredibly diverse. And actually that diversity makes it has been kind of maybe one of the barriers for Colombia's agricultural growth, just because you have so many different niches, so many different agricultural products that could be produced, and a country that infrastructure-wise is very expensive to move product around in. And so I'll come back to some of those barriers, but bottom line here is it's a beautiful country to work with, and I think you'll have great fun if you're successful in any of these bids. Next slide. So just to give you a quick overview of Colombia, the kind of agricultural sector in Colombia. Agriculture is 6% of the total GDP. You can see there that kind of between the exports and the imports, there's a huge amount, 26 billion of US dollars of exports. Many of those products, kind of pretty emblematic on coffee. Colombian coffee, very famous. Colombian flowers, along with Kenya, it's one of the biggest kind of exporters in the flower market. Banana and plantain, and sugar and beef are the kind of the primary big export crops. And then you can also see there some imports. The balance is much more on the export side, but $5.8 billion of imports coming from maize as a primary staple for the country, but then also some crops like wheat and barley, which really climatically are not so competitive here. So practically all of those products are imported rather than actually produced in country. Some soybean imports and some sorghum, but really the primary kind of role of agriculture in Colombia is for self-sufficiency, but also for export, and those are higher value products. Look at the kind of population and social aspects. 48 million people, 24% of the population live in rural areas. And you can see that it's not like African level poverty, but you do nevertheless have 18.4 million people living on less than $4 a day. So you do have equity issues. Colombia has a high Gini coefficient, pretty big equity issues, which is one of the focuses of this Prosperity Fund, looking at the issue of gender and kind of smallholder agriculture. 40% of that poverty is in rural areas. So rural areas pretty important in terms of looking at reduction in poverty levels. Jobs, 3.4 million people actively employed in primary production agriculture. That's 7% of the working population. You can see there a big gender gap. 75% is male employment, 25% women. And you can see that the scale, the kind of farm size there is heavily skewed towards small-scale farmers. So 81% of farms are less than 20 hectares. And so, again, that's a big focus for this Prosperity Fund. On the nutrition side of things, there you can see kind of the prevalence of people undernourished is 11%. That's quite specific to certain areas. So there are certain areas up in the Caribbean coast which are kind of undernourished kind of hotspots. But a lot of that undernourishment is in rural areas. Next slide. So now we're looking at kind of agriculture in Colombia, land use and production systems. There you can see the kind of land use. You've got a huge amount of land that is still forested area. Much of that is in the Amazon basin, but also in the Pacific side. You have 34% which are permanent meadows and pastures, so pasture lands. And if you look at the statistics within that, a lot of it is degraded lands. And then a pretty small percentage, just 3%, is in permanent crops and arable land. So a small footprint is actually in agriculture. but that small footprint is producing quite a lot of product. You can look there at the kind of the harvested area. There, the primary crops. The primary crop is others. So there you can see the diversity of the agricultural systems in Colombia. There's no single crop which is hugely dominant. You have 17% in coffee, quite a 13% in maize, 12% in rice, 10% in sugarcane, but many other crops in those are being harvested. So again, this big diversity in the products. When you look at the production systems in terms of kind of importance in Colombia in terms of economic performance, you have there cattle, meat, and milk. And you can see in the numbers there a little bit about productivity. And so there's in the green is the dark green is the Colombian levels of production. In the lighter green is the kind of average for Latin America and the Caribbean. So just to benchmark a little bit. The first thing you'll notice in many products where Colombia is quite low in terms of production versus other countries in Latin America. So there is a productivity, it's kind of a yield gap. You look at cattle. There you can see the numbers. It's much lower, especially in small and medium scale farmers than Latin American averages. You'll find less than half a head of cattle per hectare is the average across Colombia. So generally, cattle livestock is very extensive systems, pretty low productivity, and linked a lot to land speculation and land issues. So that's one of the big challenges is how to kind of intensify the livestock system, but do it sustainably without putting greater pressure on forests, for example, which is one of the priorities right now of the Colombian government. You look at some of the other crops there. Sugarcane is maybe the exception. In sugarcane, Colombia, and it's right around Cali, right around Ciudad, where I'm sat right now. Is a sea of sugarcane, and actually it has some of the highest productivity levels in the world. Very technified sugarcane. But then you look in many other of those kind of staple crops: maize, plantain, potato, for example. Colombia's below Latin American averages, and so plenty of opportunity to increase there. On coffee, lower productivity levels, but Colombia's kind of positioned itself more on the high value, so that maybe is not necessarily representative of the problem. Next slide. So looking at productivity indicators there, you can see huge levels of fertilizer use. And so this is one of the issues. I mean, one of the things is that in Colombia there's very poor or very little data on fertilizer use. It's actually hard to understand what's really being used. But national statistics are showing very high levels of fertilizer use, which is probably over-fertilizer, and it's probably incredibly concentrated also on some of the more commercial agriculture. So there's a big need for greater fertilizer use efficiency. On irrigated land, very small footprint of the land is irrigated. That's partly because you have good rain, so across much of Colombia you have very good climate, but also there's kind of there is a big demand, greater demand for irrigation, and there's very little infrastructure in the agricultural sector for irrigation. And then if you look at labor productivity, again, it's lower than averages across Latin America and very much below what OECD averages are. So there you can see kind of labor productivity is, again, another issue. And labor is becoming more and more a constraint as people are moving to cities. So rural labor is becoming a kind of primary constraint to agricultural development now. Next slide. So looking at just emissions there, Colombia kind of relatively in the world has pretty low levels of emissions, but when you look at the footprint of agriculture within the national statistics, agriculture is the first sector in terms of emissions, 38%, closely followed by energy with 37%. When you look at those emissions, it's split in two ways, very simply. Half of it is coming from nitrogen fertilizers. So again, this is where this nitrous oxide, nitrogen use efficiency issues become pretty important. And the other half comes from enteric fermentation from livestock. Again, increasing kind of sustainable intensification of livestock systems is a high priority, not just from economic indicators, but also a high priority with the government to reduce emissions nationally. And so those are the emissions. If we move on, next slide there, you've got a kind of big slide full of logos. impossible to do a good job when you start naming institutions, because there's always going to be an institution saying, "Hey, why didn't you mention us?" But these are the kind of the big ones that we kind of thought were worth mentioning, just to map out a little bit the kind of national scale and kind of mainly public sector institutions that play an important role here. First of all, you've got on the top right side, you have the Ministry of Agriculture, obviously very important. Ministry of Environment, very interested in looking at sustainable growth, green growth issues. And the National Planning Department, who set a lot of the policy frameworks. And then Colciencias is the equivalent of kind of is the science foundation for Colombia. So that's the government entity with the science funding. Under there, then you have some other specifics. Corpuica is the National Agricultural Research Institution. They have a strong mandate, a growing number of PhD researchers, and pretty much cover most of the country. They have a mandate for both research and technology and extension. You have ICA, who work on phytosanitary issues, pest and disease issues. You have OPRA, who are looking at rural kind of planning. So they're doing a lot of land use, kind of what crops and what systems are most appropriate for different sites, and are also involved in a lot of the kind of land tenure issues in rural areas, which is becoming more and more of an issue across Colombia. There's a lot of been a lot of migration. I'll come back to that. And then you have financial institutions, Firu Agraria, Banco Agrario de Colombia, Finagro, who are providing financial support from government for smallholder agriculture. CCI, who are looking at commercializing Colombian products. And IDIAM is the National Meta and Environmental Office, the kind of environmental agency of Colombia. Then you have another set, if you look on the right, on the top left side, producer organizations. So you have these gremios, they're called. They're federations of producers who are actually they're very powerful institutions. They represent, for specific commodities, they represent kind of all growers across the country, have strong lobby power with the government, but also have their own technical kind of extension systems. And so Fedegan do with livestock, Fede Arroz is rice, Fenalce is cereals, including maize, Asocaña work on sugarcane, Fede Palma on palm oil, Asoho Frucol on fruits and horticultural crops. And then they're under the umbrella of the SAC, which is the Society of Colombian Agricultural Agriculturalists. And so those are kind of they're national level, quite important institutions within Colombia. Generally represent more commercial side of agriculture. Many of the smallholders, as you'll see in a little bit. No, I don't have it in a slide, but you'll see kind of 75% of farmers, for example, are not associated with any kind of association or collective kind of farmers group. So and many of those are the smallholders. So they are quite isolated institutionally, but nevertheless, those national scale producer organizations are important and very powerful in Colombia. And then you have agricultural research centers for specific crops. There you can see some of them. I won't mention them. And then very important institutions like CIAT, of course, but also CIMIT working on maize as international research organizations here. So that's a little bit the kind of more public-facing organizations. Then you have a very booming, obviously, private sector on everything from kind of input suppliers through the supply chain. And I won't go into the details on that, but we're, as I'll outline a little bit later, we're here to help kind of match you up with those kinds of players. So next slide. So just to quickly go through some of the key challenges, just to summarize some of the big ones. One is post-conflict rural development. So Colombia had 53 years of conflict with the primary armed group, which is the FARC. In 2016 signed a peace agreement. We're now in a post-conflict reality in Colombia, and so there's a lot of funds going for post-conflict work. The result of this conflict has been the 6.9 million internally displaced people, many of them from the countryside, and you have large areas of Colombia practically kind of abandoned by either abandoned or has been stateless for many decades. And so one of the big challenges for Colombia really is getting agricultural technology and supply chains and the institutions working in areas pretty much that have been left without any support for the last few decades. And so that this is one of the big priorities for the government right now. It's also a huge challenge because the reality of working in many of these sites is pretty difficult. Between just lack of institutions to work with, to isolation and distance and lack of infrastructure to reach these places, and then the issue of remaining mines and all sorts of still kind of dwindling conflict issues. But this is a big challenge and a big priority for the government, and the Prosperity Fund is. An aspect of this Prosperity Fund is supporting Colombia in a post-conflict agenda. So agriculture is at the center of that post-conflict agenda. If you want to grow, these areas, if you're looking for economic development for many of these areas, it's going to come from agriculture. So that's a key priority. Second is just getting supply chains working. So Colombia has pretty very diverse products, as I've outlined. You have a huge diversity of players here, the different stages along the supply chain, and I would say if you kind of analyze many of these supply chains, they're quite inefficient. The infrastructure, the cost of moving material across Colombia is high. The value addition is pretty low in each of these kind of stages, and you've got a lot of middlemen and inefficiency in the cost structures within that. And if you analyze the kind of inclusive nature of these supply chains, many of the benefits are not arriving down to the smallholder farmers. So the prices that the smallholders are getting are pretty pitiful compared to the markups that many actors along the supply chain are getting. So this is looking at inclusive business is an important challenge, and how to make these supply chains more efficient and more sustainable and more productive. So that's move on to the next slide. So another one is ICT for agriculture. This was put up as one of the bullets of kind of one of the priority areas. There's a lot of kind of promise and a lot of excitement around ICTs and how they can play a role within the Colombian agricultural development kind of strategies for the next 20 years. There's a Ministry of ICTs, which is actually very dynamic, very interesting institution. And you've got a lot of startups going, but very, very few of them are reaching scale. So whilst there's kind of this promise, there's really just not the delivery on this side of things. There's interest in ICT-based extension systems. There's interest in looking at kind of satellite-based monitoring and use of drones in the agricultural sector, pest disease surveillance, amongst other things, many other kind of areas for ICT, especially in supply chains as well, on understanding food systems. So a lot of kind of excitement around that, but not much arriving at scale. So that's a challenge and a potential opportunity for the Prosperity Fund to make a difference. Next slide, climate change. I've already mentioned the emission side of things, so I won't go back to that. That's a sustainability issue of how to produce more food with kind of less emissions footprint. But also on the adaptation side of things, Colombia has long-term adaptation challenges with climate change and movement of zones up mountains and things like that with 2 degrees of warming. But also climate variability wreaks havoc in Colombia. And so you have huge variability year to year and a big sensitivity of the Colombian agricultural sector to El Nino and La Nina cycles. So you have every 3 to 5 years you'll have an El Nino or La Nina that literally just almost grinds the agricultural sector to a halt because of drought or excess rain and waterlogging and flooding and so on. So these are big challenges as kind of the adaptation to climate change side of things. And we've actually done quite a lot of work on this in looking at how to better manage climate variability through things like climate information services. So there's scope for developing the information side of things for climate adaptation, but also on the technology side of things, how supporting the agricultural sector to deal with that climate variability, be it through drought resistance or strategies, kind of post-production kind of processes to store food more effectively. These kinds of things are important on the adaptation side of things. If we move to the next slide, just a few other, just to kind of conclude, you have kind of three big areas. One is the sustainable intensification side of things, the getting kind of supply chains working, and all of this with a perspective to improving livelihoods. So these are kind of the big picture words in the challenges that we're looking at with this Prosperity Fund, and where Colombia and its the government is interested in. Next slide. So now, in terms of the technology side of things, just to finalize, I wanted to show 3-4 slides of the priority technological demands in Colombia. There's a great document which is in Spanish called the PECTIA, which is the priorities for science and technology innovation in the agricultural sector in Colombia. It was a national process overseen by Colciencias and with Corpuica. And this developed a kind of plan from 2017 to 2027, which really answers the kind of question of what are the priority demands from Colombia on agricultural innovation. So there you can see. I apologize that this is in Spanish. But there you can see the kind of the key demands and the number of supply chains that are demanding these kinds of things. So I'll just read them through, and they'll come up in the next slides. But things like harvest management, post-harvest management, and transformation of agricultural products, socioeconomics, competitive intelligence, and kind of business development. You have planting materials and genetic improvement. You have productive systems management, so the management side of things in productive systems, quality and quality issues in agricultural inputs and products, and a few others. And I'll just go through a little bit under the key priority areas. So under sustainable intensification, this is now kind of back in English, but these are some of the things that came up: improved varieties and animal breeds, pest and disease management technologies, rapid low-cost diagnostic systems in the field, mechanization issues, both large-scale but also small-scale mechanization issues. I think would be very, very interesting for things like to kind of overcome some of these labor productivity issues. Sensors, measurement equipment, automation of factors relevant to agriculture, the kind of whole issue of automation, and ICTs. So that comes up under the kind of sustainable intensification banner. If we go to the next one, supply chains, there you've got things like innovations that increase rural income through improved processing or storage, integrate smallholders into supply chains. This is this inclusive business side of things. Bioinputs, entomopathogens, and biocontrollers. Again, this is kind of from a supply chain input perspective, but also a sustainability issue. A lot of natural ecosystems, and there's a lot of kind of negativity around use of more kind of chemical inputs. Development of vaccines for animals, again, ICTs for efficiency in supply chain, and management of harvest, post-harvest, and transformation of products. So that's on the supply chains. Next one. Final one is on improving livelihoods. So there's the issue of improved varieties and animal breeds, including kind of varieties with higher nutritional value, so the nutritional aspect, but also the productivity side for increasing incomes. Integrating smallholders into supply chains, again coming up there, and agricultural practices that are better for human health. So again, this is related maybe to the input side of things. So those are taken from that document, some of the kind of high-level priorities that came out. Now, just to finish, finally, CIAT's role in this agri-tech catalyst. So So I see ourselves essentially as marriage counselors. We're working very closely with Innovate UK and with the KTN, the Knowledge Transfer Network, to promote on the Colombia side. We're a kind of mirror to a certain extent of what Innovate UK and KTN are doing in the UK. We're a mirror here in Colombia. We're doing media and promotional campaigns here. It's kind of telling the story of what the AgriTech Catalyst is and what are the opportunities for Colombian institutions. Looking at supporting activities, support activities for those Colombian partners. So we'll hold an event similar to what you've got right now in London, also here. Provide technical advice on agriculture in Colombia. So this presentation's a start, but feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions kind of on anything that I've presented or in terms of documents for justifying kind of certain priorities and things. And then just on the right side there, matchmaking. So we're really about what we're doing right now is doing a kind of list, a roster of all of the Colombian institutions interested in partnering and some of the technologies that they're interested in, some of their demand or very specific kind of needs that they have. And we're going to create that roster and then share that with KTN, with Innovate UK, and hopefully with the broader community, so that we can help you matchmake and find good partners here in Colombia. And so we'll facilitate the kind of the first steps in terms of you making those partnerships happen. And then when the mission comes, will be support on the ground during the mission. And so there we're hoping to be pretty think on our feet, do things Colombian way, which is kind of based on lots of improvisation and lots of kind of on the go thinking to make sure that you make full use of that mission. So we'll help identify kind of one-on-one partnerships that you might be able to develop and facilitate those dialogues, as the need arises during the mission. So we'll be here on the ground with a number of people to help on that. So that's in the immediate sphere, and then what we'll be doing is then play a role of supporting again in the implementation once your proposals are in and successful applicants are selected. We'll also then be here on the ground to help you also just get the marriage working, make sure that the marriage delivers. So that's everything from us. So that's kind of the role of CIAT, our role in this, and some of the priorities. Feel free to think about your questions, and I think through the miracles of technology, we'll be connected for the Q&A. So I'll talk to you a bit later. Thanks a lot.